Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will just, before we get started, ask everybody to turn off their cell phones or silence their cell phones before we begin. My name is Hannah Barrick. I'm the Assistant Executive Director for the Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officials, and PASBO is a member of the PA Schools Work Campaign. And this press conference this morning is one of 6 that are happening across the state, highlighting the need for additional state investment in education. As you will hear this morning, school districts are facing a historic moment in education. School leaders are finalizing their budgets right now, and they are doing that as they continue to deal with all of the complexities of responding to the pandemic, recovering from the pandemic, and moving beyond the pandemic. With all of those challenges come additional pandemic-related costs on top of the annual increases in mandated costs, and a lot of uncertainty, particularly following a year of flat state funding. And while school districts are certainly benefiting from significant investments in federal funds in response to the pandemic, the use of those funds creates some additional challenges, some long-term challenges. These are one-time federal funds, and school districts have been reminded multiple times by policymakers that they can't use these federal funds to cover those ongoing costs. The challenge, however, is that those ongoing costs, such as special education programs and services, charter school tuition, those are the very items that are driving school district budgets. So to help school districts ensure that they can effectively move beyond the pandemic, ensure that students have the supports and services that they need to succeed, and to do so without any negative impacts on student programs and services or any significant additional burden being placed on local taxpayers, the additional state funding is really, really essential, at the very least to cover the annual mandated cost increases that school districts are anticipating. So this morning you will hear from 3 school districts, each of whom will share the challenges that they are working through in their districts. And while the individual details that they will talk about will be unique to their district, the overall challenges are similar, and they will be similar stories that will be being shared across the state this morning and very uniform across 500 school districts. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mike Licklider, the Superintendent of Penn Manor School District. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Hannah, for the introduction. And everyone, welcome to Hambright Elementary School in the Penn Manor School District. I'm Mike Licklider. I serve as the superintendent of Penn Manor, and we serve approximately 5,400 students in 10 buildings across the district, 110 square miles. And this year, because of the pandemic, we also that also includes about 800 students who've chosen to go virtual. But as a 12-year veteran of the superintendency in the district and as a 30-year public educator, I can share that the challenges we faced this year are, we've talked about the term precedent setting. It has been just an unbelievable year, a challenging year for schools, but in many ways an exciting year. If you look around the school, you can see we have all of our students here. They're actually taking our PSSA, our state assessments today, so it's a rather quiet place, but there's artwork. We've been able to do some amazing things with students since August 31st, our first day of school. And while school has looked different in many ways this year, that constant striving for excellence has continued in all of our schools. Our school board works hard to ensure that we provide a high-quality education for our students. Just last week, U.S. News and World Report released their latest Best High Schools edition, and Penn Manor, we were thrilled to learn that Penn Manor ranks 71 out of 678 high schools in the state, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which places us in the top 11%. If you compare that top 11% figure to the fact that the Department of Education's most recent annual financial report ranks us as 386, that's 386 from the bottom of 500 school districts, our expenditures per students, per pupil rank in the bottom 20%. So we're able to produce very high quality results on a very frugal budget, which we think is a benefit to our taxpayers both locally and at the state. But our academic and financial situation is, while it's great, the financial challenges are also becoming more and more strenuous for districts and school boards to handle. While I'm grateful for that one-time infusion of federal funding, Penn Manor's current projected budget deficit for the 2021-2022 school year is $4.2 million, and I am concerned that those federal funds will be seen by many as the solution, while we cannot use them for those ongoing expenses to plug budgets. The budget gap that we're experiencing can't be attributed to extraordinary expenses caused by COVID. Rather, most of the increases we're seeing are directly related to the other mandated costs that Hannah referenced. We're seeing huge increases in our special education expenditures, our cyber charter costs, as well as the continuing increase in pension costs, which were projected to be plateaued by now about 10 years ago. They continue to increase. So briefly I want to highlight for everyone our special education expenditures. Our special education programs and services are critical for our students. They're also significant cost drivers for our taxpayers. While our district costs have increased annually, our state funding for special education has fallen behind, with flat funding for the current school year, which has only made our deficit worse. During the current year, our expenditures for special education totaled approximately $15 million out of a nearly $100 million budget. And the costs have risen at an average annual rate of 7.8%, while state and federal subsidy has only increased by about 2.3% over the past 5 years. So why the increase? Why are we seeing such an increase in those mandated special education costs? It's because the needs of our new students and our newly identified students continue to increase at a rate that outpaces the funding we're receiving. So for example, in 2010-2011, the district had 3 students who required educational programming exceeding $75,000 a year. That number now totals 20 students who require high-cost programming due to the extent of their disabilities and needs. As a result, the school board and the administration have to make tough decisions of how to juggle those dollars. And in many cases, those dollars are coming from other programs in order to meet the mandated costs of special education, which we have no control over, nor do we have any decision to make other than to fund those programs for the needs of the students. So unfortunately, this often involves choosing winners and losers among our various academic programs, which is not a good situation for our students or our taxpayers. And while it's difficult for Penn Manor, I know that many of my superintendent colleagues around the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania have similar or even more challenging issues than we face in Penn Manor. So Penn Manor enjoys a very good relationship with all of our state lawmakers, and we appreciate and value their interest in the education of our students and our parents. And I just ask, as our state lawmakers finalize the 2021 budget, that they take into consideration the rapidly rising mandated costs that we're experiencing as they seek to find methods to adequately and equitably fund schools. So I thank you for your participation, and at this time I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Robert Hollister, who is the superintendent of Eastern Lancaster County School District.
Thank you, Dr. Licklider. As Dr. Licklider said, my name is Bob Hollister. I'm the superintendent of Eastern Lancaster County School District. Eastern Lancaster County has similar challenges in funding in our special needs students. We too adore and find it a privilege to serve these special learners and welcome their contributions to our culture and our student body. Elanco costs are similar to Penn Manor. In the last 10 years, special education expenditures have doubled from $4 million to $8 million, with the Commonwealth's contribution remaining essentially flat. $8 million is a considerable portion of our total $60 million budget at Eastern Lancaster County. While these costs are appropriate, they are also unavoidable and non-negotiable. Equally concerning, if not more so, is the skyrocketing cost of cyber charter schools. As you are probably aware, each school district is mandated to pay the owners and operators of charter schools the sending district's per pupil cost. And here's where the logic of that breaks down and the inequities begin. The graduation rates and PSSA. Eliminating the cyber charter school mandated costs or seriously reducing the burden to local taxpayers is long overdue. It is my pleasure now to introduce a colleague from across the river, Dr. David Christopher from the Cumberland Valley School District for some additional comments.
Thank you, Dr. Hollister. It's unusual for me to be speaking in front of anything that isn't have an eagle on it or is not red and black, but I will do that this morning. So good morning. Throughout the past year, our schools have been open to support students. I think that's a narrative that we need to make sure is out there. Our schools are open. You saw kids walking around here today. You see them in classes, and our schools at Cumberland Valley have been open. Our elementary students have been in school 5 days a week for face-to-face instruction all year long. At the middle and high school level, we began the year in a hybrid format so that we could meet safety guidelines while also providing face-to-face instruction for school for students. As mandates have relaxed and as we've come to understand COVID-19 better, we have brought more and more kids back into our schools and continually tried to open our schools as fully as we could, including Cumberland Valley High School, which is one of the largest high schools in Pennsylvania. In addition to being open for face-to-face instruction, we also created a fully virtual academy. 2,800 of our students took us up on being virtual this year. So we have 2,800 students, AAA school district, overnight that we created as a virtual school. Our virtual academy has been tremendously successful this year and has provided our students with a high-quality education. So much so that the vast majority of our virtual education students are going to come in and take their PSSA and Keystone exams because they want to show how great we did this year. So, I think that's a testament to what we're doing at Cumberland Valley as well. They like to demonstrate the fact that they received a high-quality education even though they were virtual this year. And we are excited to see how we compare in our virtual academy to charter school performance, where some of our students have left. Our schools have been open for business, and our students are thriving. They are not surviving. But all this has come at a substantial cost. Cumberland Valley's 21-22 school budget has a projected deficit of $6.3 million. And while there are some one-time ESSER and ARP funds that we can use to pay for those costs, they're one-time costs. And our main cost drivers in this budget are increased staffing due to increased students, special education, and charter school costs. None of those are one-time. Those are all ongoing costs for us. So expect it to work out. It will not. Many members of the legislature will point to the ESSER and ARP funds as a way to help address some of these challenges, especially in the short term. But because these funds are not ongoing, they cannot be mistaken for regular, local, state, and federal funding. Our districts need those funds to continue to operate year over year. Our main costs as school districts are always ongoing, not one time, and state funding has not kept pace with Cumberland Valley's needs. In the governor's most recent budget, the governor allocated $4.4 million additional dollars in basic education funding to Cumberland Valley. These funds, which were driven out through the new funding formula, took into account the increased growth that Cumberland Valley has seen. In the past 6 years, Cumberland Valley has increased more than 3,000 students, making it the fastest growing school district in Pennsylvania. Because of the current uncertainty with state funding, we've been forced to budget only a tiny fraction of that $4.4 million because we're unsure whether or not we're going to get any of it. And so I think as a district, we have to ensure that the funds we put into our budget are ones we're going to receive. Without an additional revenue, our local taxpayers are going to be holding the bag once again. Unless additional state funds are driven out through the new funding formula, Cumberland Valley will continue to receive a smaller and smaller share of per-student funding from state sources. This is in addition to the funding gaps we're seeing for our special education student population. In the past 6 years, Cumberland Valley has added 13 programs for autism, so 13 additional classrooms for students with autism. In that time, the state share of special education costs has dropped from 24.4% to 21.7%. So our numbers are increasing dramatically and our funding is decreasing. We are coming to a critical juncture for many Pennsylvania's public schools. Unless additional funds are made available at the state level, we should anticipate that schools will be forced to offer less and less opportunities for students, or local taxpayers will be forced to increase their share of support for their school districts, which further exacerbates inequities that we see across Pennsylvania in the funding of schools. We need solutions from our legislative leaders who under the PA state constitution are responsible for educating our children. We need our legislators to step up and address the challenges we're facing after the pandemic in the near term and to provide ongoing funding solutions that will address funding challenges for Pennsylvania schools in the long term. We need solutions that work for Pennsylvanians and we need schools that work. We appreciate your time and thank you for coming today. we're available to take questions. Any of us would be glad to do that. If there are any questions that you have for any of us, we are willing and able to do that. We will be masking back up as we're standing next to each other, and let us know if you have any questions you'd like any of us to answer. Sure. Yep. Okay.